It's a great privilege to be here. I'm looking for the vents. If it gets stuffy, people in the back should open the door and let oxygen in if we need it. But it's magnificent to be your guest today. We are doing. Well, look, Ab and I had a little bit of a negotiation because was he going to say the title is Politics and War, which he set, not me. Now that's very liberating for me because if I set the title, then okay, I'm a professor. One thing with scholarship, you must be careful to defend according to, there are many different methodologies that we can use in different parts of economics or different parts of any science for deriving and proving propositions, but academic discourse, scholarly discourse should be careful about making assertions that we can in some way defend, and then we have to make them very precisely, and that's what we normally do. But maybe that means there are important things that we kind of are getting to, but we aren't really speaking about. So it's nice every now and then would be nice to talk about things in a less disciplined way. I will say, you're right. After a Nobel Prize, I've had more demands to give lectures where would I please not try to be so precise, but say something that they care about. And the question is, can I still say something that's worth saying? So we're going to do. So this could be very good, or it could be disappointing. And yes, you're right to come because the expected value is high, although the variance is also high. And I may totally miss it and blab about things that are pointless, but I'm going to try to say things that are really interesting and maybe important and maybe insightful. And it would be wonderful if they were inspiring to some of you to then think more carefully than I will do today about important questions of politics and war. And perhaps I'll succeed, and perhaps because I'm being undisciplined, I'll completely fail. But it's a gamble worth trying, and that's why I'm glad. I have here, let me just say, I have a paper called Standards for State Building that was published in a book edited by Robert Solow and Janice Murray, called Economics for the Curious, and it's what I would have given if I was going. But then I would have to put slides up and follow exactly. And maybe I'll say some things about what's in Standards for State Building. But let me start on politics and war, and just saying I can talk in a way that I think I'm going to try to be as interesting as possible. Whether I succeed or fail, you'll be the judge. I think a good place to start is with Thucydides. Obviously, Thucydides wrote brilliantly about war, and war is an extension of politics. But at the beginning of Thucydides' book, he says something that puzzles people, but I think I understand. He says, I have a lot of speeches. So Thucydides, you know, wrote on the history of the Peloponnesian War, the great war between Athens and Sparta. I think this is like 320-something BC to 301 BC, approximately, plus or minus a few years there. It was a long struggle, ultimately disastrous for the Athenians. And Thucydides was an Athenian general, and at some point thrown out of Athens because they didn't like the mob didn't like something he did. And he writes this magnificent book, and this is the beginning of history, of historical. Yes, the beginning in our tradition of Western tradition of certainly of military history writing. It begins with the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, magnificent book. In the book, he says at the beginning, all the speeches that I give, I'm going to quote sometimes speeches that important leaders gave before audiences, and all the speeches I give, that I quote here, are what they said or what they should have said. And that's my English translation. I haven't read the original Greek, but people probably, wait a minute, if he's a historian, has he been careful to get what they said? If it's what they should have said, then we're really reading what Thucydides thinks. And he doesn't tell us which ones he thinks is what. Anyway, let me tell you what I think they are. I'm a game theorist, and I think those speeches, such rhetoric is in other ancient Greek classics as well, but in Thucydides, they look like game models. It's like somebody. You got to love these guys. I have to love them. I think when you read those speeches, what you're getting is someone is saying, here we are in this situation, and here's a game model of the situation, and here's the rational strategy for our side, here's the rational strategy for their side. There's a wonderful the island of Lesbos rose up in rebellion against Athens, and the speech was made in which he says, look, you've got this dynamic game where they have to decide whether or not to rebel, then we have to take a cost of suppressing it, and if we succeed in suppressing it, we want them not to rebel in the future, so what we need to do is kill them all. And so a boat is sent with troops to go kill all the people who have been conquered on this island, and then somebody else says, wait a minute, there's a more complicated model that has an extra thing. After they've rebelled, when we send a force, they can either surrender peacefully, or we can, and we want them to surrender peacefully at that stage. And then the subgame perfect equilibrium, it didn't use that exact term, but is that you shouldn't kill them all when you've defeated them in those. So they send a second boat, and happily the second boat gets there before the first, and it goes faster, and they're not all killed. But what's going on there? The answer is these guys are giving speeches to describe a simplified version of the strategic situation, the incentives of the various parties, and what strategy should we be using. The Melian debate, I would argue, is really an argument about the focal equilibrium. It seems to be on the same question as the Lesbos one, but the models are different for some reason. My very favorite one, there's a debate, if I recall correctly, among the leaders of Syracuse in Sicily, Syracusa, and they're trying to decide how to react to the possibility of an Athenian invasion, and should they send a fleet to intercept it or not, because it will be very costly for them to fight the Athenians if the Athenians land in Sicily. And someone stands up and gives a speech where he says, look, if they invade, if they send a fleet against us, then it'll happen this way and that way, and there'll be these costly battles, but in the end it'll be a disaster for Athens, and the Athenians know that, therefore there's no Athenian fleet coming, so we don't have to send So the Syracusans have this beautiful belief in rationality and rational choice. Of course, it turns out the Athenians didn't understand the model. The fleet did come, and with some cost, it was costly for the Syracusans, but disastrous for the Athenians, exactly as the model. But you got these people. We don't have to send it. Why would they send it? Why would they attack us when you realize what the game is? Okay. So I want to say that's meant to be a spirit of game modeling. When I teach game theory at the undergraduate level in Chicago, I say that game theory is a language for describing interactions between people in a way that we get insights into interactions, but in some ways all branches of literature that you care about are also languages and stylistic ways of writing about interactions among people in order to understand people better. And as I say, Thucydides' speeches, the leaders' speeches in Thucydides' Peloponnesian history, the Peloponnesian War, are to me the closest thing I can find in antiquity to using a language very similar to game theory. It's not game theory. Game theory is a much narrower language, but more precise. When you describe a game, you say, who are the players? What choices do they have to make at various points in time? What information do they have, depending on the previous history, probabilistically at the time that they make these various decisions? What are their ultimate goals? Summarized by a utility payoff function. And with that, we've thrown away all the nuance of language that people use when they tell stories about interactions in literature, but some things are much clearer. And my first example in my undergraduate class is as I take the story of Cain and Abel, and important in mythical biblical literature, and try to redo it in the language of game theory and get some extra insights. Anyway, let it go at that. I'm not going to do that today. I'm looking at my notes on politics and war. I should say that my paper on standards for state building, which if this led you to want to read anything of. If you haven't read Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, then this has already been a successful investment coming today, because you should go read Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. It is great. I write things. So I blabbed about Thucydides. The question is, do I know how to spell it? Thucydides, I think. Thucydides. I think I got that right. Okay. That's what it says on my notes. I thought when I think about foundations of politics, I'm sorry, I put references up. So I mentioned my paper, Standards for State Building. This is me, Myerson, for state building.
You can just Google it, the paper's on his website.
Yeah, it'll turn up. It is amazing. What a wonderful world we live in, that we can find out all kinds of things about each other that quickly for free, which is just, anyway. There, let me say personally, I was very influenced by the America's invasion. I'm sorry, you came along. I'm sorry, you came along. We're UK. Our coalition, which included this country also, invading Iraq in 2003. I thought it was a terrible mistake. I argued against it in a variety of ways. But once America and Britain and our partners had invaded Iraq, there was a question. The president said, "We're doing it to rebuild a sovereign, independent, democratic society." The question was, how do you do? And it's a social science question, a political science question, a social science question. There is no better question. How do you do that? And so I wanted to address that question, and I thought a lot about it. And obviously, it's too big a question. And I should say, I wrote this paper on counterinsurgency theory, because counterinsurgency theory or state building is a version of the question, how do you construct from anarchy in particular, possibly an anarchy that your own people just created in your invasion. So how do you construct a good society? And the great question of social science is, how are good societies created? The ancient Greeks became interested in this because they were doing the questions of how do you make a good society became sharpened for the ancient Greeks because they lived in an age of colonization, and so there were people who would get in a boat and they'd agree on some rules before they went very far, and so that got. And I do not think, because I've written on state building, does not mean that I think anybody's country would be better off having other people come in with alleged good intentions and invade and reconstruct it politically. I think maybe sometimes a history of a country might be better off because of such an invasion, but normally not. It is not a good idea to have foreign forces come and fight. We talk about politics and war. Politics is often frustrating and unpleasant, but war is worse, and invasions are, So I'm not advocating invasions, but I nonetheless think it's a good question and a great question for social scientists to think about. What is the basis of the state, and of course, what does it mean to address that question? One answer is, when you understand the foundations of a good society and the foundations of a government better, you would know how to run policies in counterinsurgency warfare or in state-building expeditions better. So with that, let me say that I want to cite a couple more classics. One I have in mind. I have to give you my favorite. I'm sorry. Xenophon was the first. Xenophon wrote the Economicos. Xenophon but his Education of Cyrus. I'm not sure I want to recommend reading that. It's not really that good. But of Cyrus, but I can tell. But I want you to hear what I think about it, because he starts by saying, I'm interested in regime change from oligarchies to monarchies to democracies in all directions. But in order to understand how you build a society, I'm going to first look at the question of how do you build how the Persian Empire was built. And so he looks at Cyrus. Let me put off at the side, by the way. In Herodotus, Herodotus also tells a story. Both of these guys, Herodotus is before Xenophon, was in the Peloponnesian War and is the generation after. I think he wrote this around 280 BC. Herodotus, writing what 380 BC, I don't know. In his history, I think the guy's name is Deioces. And both the Education of Cyrus and Herodotus, I think, let me put question mark, I've forgotten if that's how it's spelled. These are both myths about Cyrus the Great founding the Persian Empire, and this is a myth about that Herodotus tells. These guys didn't know what was going on. They're both writing much after the historical events. So these are not histories, these are stories in the sense of Thucydides. They're game theory models. This is the ancestor of the royal who founds the royal family of Media, which was across what's now northern Iran, and Persia was a poor province in southern Iran. Is today that's still a province of Persis, and ultimately Cyrus the Great's Persian Empire is really inheriting and extending the Median Empire that this guy started. But never mind the history. That's what the point is. What's the myth? This guy, he's living in a society where the people are having these disputes, let's say about property rights, and so he gets a reputation for arbitrating disputes very, very fairly, and then everybody starts making him the judge of all questions of property rights. Once you can judge property rights, then of course you can give a certain amount of property to your friends as long as you don't go too far with it. And basically he makes himself king that way. And I have a paper on the Introduction to Social Choice Theory. I said, have this little story about people, the whole foundations of the state coming from games with multiple equilibria. That's what. A name I really want to recommend. I hope he's still alive. I saw Thomas Schelling, I think he's got to be 93 now. I saw him give a talk just like 3 or 4 years ago that was just magnificent. His strategy of conflict. 1960. I got to write for the Journal of Economic Literature in 2010, for the 50th anniversary of it, an appreciation of this book. I'll tell you, between you and me, chapters 1 to 3, those really changed my life. The whole book is worth reading, but if you only get through chapter 3, you've got a lot. One of the things that Schelling says is that when you have games with multiple equilibria, I don't know what's a good equilibrium. 0, 0. I could claim. Player 1 could claim or defer. Player 2 could claim or defer. And let's say if we both claim, we have conflict, and that hurts -1, -1. If we both defer, we get nothing. But if I don't know, I guess if I claim and you defer, I guess player 2 gets 0 and player 1 gets a big prize, call it 9. And if let's say if 1 defers and 2 claims, then 2 gets a prize worth 9. And this has an equilibrium here, because if 1 is deferring and 2 is claiming, then each would lose by deviating to the other. 0 is better than -1 and 9 is better than 0. There's another equilibrium, however, there. To me, this is the foundation of property rights. And then there's another mixed equilibrium where each one claims with probability 90% and defers with probability 10%. And there's probably going to be a conflict, and the expected payoffs are 0. Yeah.
For the non-economists, those who don't like game theory, you need to give them, they're probably dying to know where they can learn this stuff. So which is the game theory book they should learn to understand that matrix?
Yep.
Okay, those of you who don't know what that matrix is.
Yeah. Let's see. My game theory book is written for doctoral students. I think if you're good in mathematics, you can read it. But I teach out of Martin Osborne. When I teach my undergraduate class, I use Martin Osborne's Introduction to Game Theory. It's one of several excellent undergraduate game theory books that I can recommend. The point is, and this is a story in which once they focus on one or another, and if I say to you, having meditated, it's this is the player 2, it's yours. If you think that if you're player 1, you're sorry. I'm sorry. Player 1, it's yours. This is where player 1 has property rights, because player 1 is getting the payoff. Player 1 is claiming and 2 is deferring. If I say it belongs to player 1, then if you think that because I'm so important, here I am the speaker, that you must that you're player 2 and you think player 1 thinks that what I said is important, then it's it's yours. It's player one, it's not yours, player two. You'd just be making trouble for yourself if you tried to claim. And on the other hand, if you say, yes, he's a fine and fancy speaker, but really there's a history of this game, and of course everybody understands it's player two's turn to claim in the world you live in, and I'm completely irrelevant, then my words mean nothing. So anything that focuses attention on a particular equilibrium, one, it's yours, one that equals owner. Anything I do that doesn't change the game itself, but it might make us play there. Okay, so being a powerful person, being a person who is believed to be powerful, creates the reality of power, and this is the simplest myth I can give, the simplest story I can give, in which the perceived reality of power creates the reality of power. But Xenophon's education of Cyrus gets us deeper into a different tack on power. And I'll tell you that, stories, I want to be undisciplined and maybe entertaining if possible. It's a long book, he kind of overdoes it, but as in any good book, there's a point early on where a short story is told, and that short story encapsulates everything in the book. And in this case, here's what happens. Cyrus is the son of the chieftain of this poor province called Persia, and the education is, allegedly these people in Persia have this wonderful educational system that and I'll tell you, I could say a little bit more of it later. But his mother was a daughter, probably one of many daughters, of the High King of Media, descendant of this guy. So the High King, so the mom is from, probably the High King of Media has a large harem, he probably has many children, one of whom is destined to inherit from him. But Cyrus the Great, when he wasn't so great, when he was a little boy, he's got a mother who's from the High King of Media. So mom takes Cyrus, I imagine him to be about 12 years old, to go see grandpa. And so grandpa says, you come from that little province of Media, your dad is this chieftain, and you live in this poor, what passes for royalty there is like a hut compared to us. Here's a big dinner, and he brings all this meat and food, and there's a model here saying, I'm going to give you all this meat, which we know today has protein, it's going to make you strong, that's how you get to be a big warrior and have lots of power. And this is so much better than any feast you could ever have in Persia, because now you're with Grandpa, the High King of Media. Okay, good. Cyrus says, it's not so bad at my father's house. We got some virtue. We have virtues that you don't understand about. But are you really giving me all this meat, all this wonderful food here to do whatever I want with at this feast? And Grandpa says, yes, it's yours. It's all for you. And he says, oh, thank you. And then he turns to the various servants around the hall. And he says, here's some meat for you. And it's because you've been so good to me. Here's some meat for you because you've been so kind and helpful to my mother. Here's something for you because you served my grandfather so well. And then he says, you haven't done something good. I'm not giving you anything. What's going on? You said, this guy is wow, this kid is dangerous. What he understands is that credit may be more important than cash in the bank. That a reputation the essence of, now I'm going to tell you something that I think is as important as anything. If I was going to give a graduation speech where I was going to say, congratulations on your degree, here's the key to life, I think this is it. That power comes, there's a word that appears, as far as in my English translation of this only once, but as far as I can find, but it's the key. The word is gratitude. At some point, Cyrus says, the education we had in Persia taught us gratitude. Leadership depends on gratitude. Gratitude means a reputation for reliably rewarding good service. And that's what Xenophon, the Greeks like to talk, ancient Plato and Xenophon and Plato were both students of Socrates, and they like to talk about justice. And indeed, Xenophon's story, Cyrus says, I really learned to appreciate justice. My Persian education taught me to love justice. But what does that mean, to love justice? The answer is actually, what he seems to mean by it in the book is that he loves nothing better than to sit and watch professional killers on a battlefield, and then after the battle to divide up the booty, the cows and the gold that they seize as a result of their victory, in proportion to the valor of the various soldiers. He doesn't want, that's just his crazy thing. He loves to do that. So naturally, everybody wants him to be the paymaster of their army. What happens is the High King of Medea has died, Grandpa's dead, one of Cyrus's uncles is now the King of Medea, and they have this invasion of Iraq. And there's a coalition of the willing, and the Persians are an auxiliary force in the invasion of Iraq. It's called Babylonian at the time, but never mind. But Cyrus convinces everyone that he is the one who you can most trust to divide up in a fair way the spoils of victory. And so now everybody wants him to be basically the commander of the army, and with that, he's got the Persian Empire. You see the Persian Empire coming. The uncle eventually has to step down because everybody's following Cyrus. Nobody's following him because everyone trusts Cyrus as the reliable paymaster. And suddenly, what's going on there? Let me tell a couple of other stories. I'll tell one other from antiquity and then get to the development of government of this country. This is really obscure, but I do want to Telipinu proclamation. King Telipinu was, I want to get to the foundations of the state through stories that I can model game theoretically. So Education of Cyrus, I've modeled game theoretically. Herodotus, I modeled game theory. This one's a little trick. Well, I don't know, maybe, I've done this one also, a game theory model of this. Telipinu was a king of the Hittites around 1500 BC. And he tells the story, we have his proclamation. It's in cuneiform tablets. There was a fire in the storage room, and that preserved the ancient records. And so I guess there are a couple of copies of the Telipinu proclamation and a large. So what we have, basically he says this. The Hittite, he's making an important he's making an important constitutional decree. He says, we conquered what's now Turkey, he doesn't mention, Anatolia, Turkey, because there was a royal family, which is now the royal family of the Hittites, that was very cohesive. The leader of the family, everybody obeyed, they all trusted that they would be reliably rewarded for good service. People followed this family that was very cohesive. They conquered, they beat up people all over, and they established themselves as the overlords and masters of most of what's now Turkey. And various cousins of the royal family went out to become governors of the provinces. But then we started fighting with each other. The provincial governors would rise up in revolt. And the king would suspect that somebody was going to revolt and kill him, or a governor would suspect he was about to be killed by the king and would rise in revolt. When you're a cousin of the king and you're ruling a province, you have a bunch of soldiers, hundreds of soldiers who obey you, but you're under the command of the king. If the king, we're going to kill you tomorrow, you'd be much better off today to rise up and revolt. And you see there's this alternative equilibrium. Once you're afraid that the king is going to kill you, you want to rise up and revolt. And once you're about to rise up and revolt, the king would like to kill you before you send your army. So we've just spoiled our cohesiveness, haven't we? So Telepinu's solution is this. He says, from now on, the king, that's me right now, the king cannot kill any member of the royal family without a hearing of the council. So there's an existing, we're celebrating the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, but actually the idea that a monarch needs to be a monarch is more powerful when he accepts constraints from the court around him. No monarch rules alone, and Telipinu was saying, so don't worry, peasants can be killed anytime the king feels like it, but members of the royal family, we need to have a hearing. And of course, if you're innocent, if you haven't done anything, we won't kill you. And now we can trust each other. Let me say something about. I have spent a lot of time trying to understand the power. The whole world. Let me back up and say, development economics. Development economists and political scientists are trying to understand how countries that have been poor can become rich, and the world is a good place in 2015. The desperately poor nations of the world are becoming a small fraction of the world. The secret the economic growth that began an unprecedented economic growth that began in Europe and North America and, a couple of hundred years ago has spread throughout the whole world, but we're still trying to figure out what the secret was. 100 years ago, a large fraction of the world was ruled by this country, England. On my maps when I was a kid, there were the pink parts. So something was done right. By the way, I think a great question, somewhere there must be some documents, and I have one in my backpack that's my best guess. It must be documents that people were writing about how to establish political control in a random part of Asia or Africa, because the people somewhere in this country were studying because they did a lot of it. We are not, while I want to honor all the traditions of this country this country's traditions, among others, deserve enormous respect and honor, and I should say, I think, as someone who comes from New England, Boston, that having been colonized by the English was certainly better than being colonized by many other people who might have been around. It was being conquered by England was better than being conquered by Genghis Khan, for example, which is not saying very much, but I'm not here to be an apologist for colonialism, but one wants to understand the secret of success. I think. So let me tell you if you read the origins of English government, from my perspective. I think if you read the origins of the development of English political institutions in the Middle Ages, I actually find, I'm sorry to say, it's very difficult for me to find significance of Magna Carta. I see two other things as being much more important. One is the development of the Exchequer, and the other is the development of Parliament. Let me say a little bit, because I think this gets to the, I've talked about the importance of the political power comes from political leadership. Political leadership requires that a political leader needs supporters, and those supporters need to feel that they can trust that they will be well rewarded. And when young Cyrus, the future great, was showing his grandpa's servants that they could trust him to pay them for their good service, and grandpa only controls the kingdom of Medea through these servants. If these servants start to think, well, young Cyrus would pay me more reliably than grandpa, then in some sense he's more qualified to be king. He's not going to become king unless everybody else recognizes him become king. If you think I'm the most splendid person in the world, if I could convince you of that, but nobody else thinks I'm king, then it's ridiculous to think I'm king. And if you thought very inferior of me, but everybody else thinks I'm king, then you'd be a fool not to think I was king. So that's a multiple equilibrium problem. Schelling teaches us to appreciate the importance of multiple equilibrium. But to be a powerful king, to be king of England requires a certain consensus. To be a good, strong king of England requires some institutions that give more people trust. There is, from the reign of Henry II, a dialogue of the Exchequer. I have an edition of it. It's the left-hand page has the original Latin and modern English translations on the facing right page. I read the right, of course. But in this dialogue, he says, the Exchequer was about the Chancellor of the Exchequer today, finance minister. It's about finance, largely. It gets its name from a checkered tablecloth. And by the way, he specifically says, this is written about 1170 AD, that we're pushing tokens on this as we're doing this accounting on the checkered tablecloth, because the new Arabic numerals, not many people know how to do addition in the new Arabic numerals, which had just come to Europe around that generation. But this is by Richard Fitznagel, about 1170. But then he says, but just like on a checkerboard, there is a conflict. There are two parties in conflict at the Exchequer. Just as at a checkerboard, there are two parties in conflict when you play checkers or chess. So at this checkerboard at the Exchequer, there are two parties in conflict. And I want to pause for a moment to say, who are the two parties in conflict at the Exchequer? He gives the answer. The answer is, one, the treasurer, who is the representative of the royal government of England at the center. The second is the sheriff. The sheriff is really a provincial governor. So the sheriff or governor, provincial governor, who is sitting to account. So the Exchequer beginning in Henry I and Henry II in the 1100s, is the foundation. Everybody, all medieval historians will tell you, I think, everything I've ever read, they all keep, it's really, this is where the power of the English state begins, with an institution that regulates the relationship between the government, it's within the government. It's the agents of the government in the provinces and the central government. They have to trust each other. And to trust each other, when a sheriff doesn't do what the king says, the king has to punish the sheriff, obviously, but like by firing him, dismissing him. Sheriff or sheriff is a powerful person who lives very well. If he does it, his grandchildren will be of the highest aristocracy of England if he can do his sheriff job very well. But he has to do it well. And the king, but on the other hand, the king has to occasionally punish a sheriff for malfeasance. On the other hand, the king only controls England through his sheriffs because they're his representatives in the provinces. Therefore, he can't punish them too often. So everybody has to know that when he does punish them, by the way, when he punishes the sheriff by dismissing him, he can then appoint somebody else sheriff. And there are lots of people who would like to be sheriff because it's a very powerful institution. It's the key to rising for a smart young guy to become one of the most powerful people in England. That's the entry point. These guys are not nobles. They are commoners, but they're entering the highest aristocracy through service as provincial governors. So lots of people want to do it, and he has to. Twice a year, a large subset of the power structure of England gathered around to watch as the sheriff settles accounts with the treasurer. So it's about establishing trust in government between the national and provincial levels. What's Parliament? I want to argue Parliament is an institution for regulating the relationship between, Parliament today is the representatives of the people at large. Parliament from 1300, it starts around late 1200s, in its first several centuries, the people who represent Parliament are not the people in general, it's the local gentry who are basically the local government elite, might call them today the borough councils, and the borough councils in the countryside and the borough councils in the city. The city councilors, they also need to trust that they exercise power for the king. Let's put a word down. Agency theory teaches us that because they have power, there's some moral hazard that they might not act as agents of the king, but might just simply act as local bosses. And so therefore they have to expect rewards. Moral hazard rents is the term in economics. For rewards that a guy has to have just because that person has power, and we don't want that person to abuse the power. There's a limit and so we have to say, if you use this, you could enrich yourself by abusing your power, but we want you to serve the king well and collect the taxes in your locality correctly. And therefore, if you collect them correctly, you'll be allowed to keep a certain amount. On the other hand, if some agent of the national government passes through and you'll be the richest person, one of the richest people, you'll be the richest person in your village because you're the guy who runs it for us. Good. But on the other hand, if the army passes through, they'll want to take some resources and you'll have them all, so we'll just steal it from you. No, we don't. No, you're allowed to keep them, and the army is not going to steal them from you. So we need to make sure that the local gentry know that national officials will not expropriate them, and that requires creating an institution where if the local officials are expropriated, they'll be able to complain in a way that makes trouble nationally. And the idea of Parliament, which really begins in Spain, but around in the early 1200s, was adopted in England, and now suddenly, so what happened? It's Edward I is your first king who really adopts Parliament. He discovers that when he calls Parliament and calls these representatives of all the shires and the gentry of the shires and the cities, he can get much more taxes than because now they trust that that when they pay their taxes, they'll be treated well, but if they don't pay their taxes, they'll be treated badly. But part of that scissors was that you'll be treated if you'll be treated badly no matter what, why bother raising taxes for the king? Why not just keep any taxes you raise under the excuse of the king's proclamation? You need to know that you keep your share, you'll be taken care of. And already, let me just say, within one generation, the creation of Parliament already overthrows a monarch. Edward II, yeah. Edward III comes to power because of a coup that was legitimized by Parliament, so already it's weakened the king. So Edward III has to be king he has to respect Parliament, but suddenly, because he respects Parliament, that means some thousands of local gentry all over the country really have faith that they have a working relationship with the king's government. They are therefore willing to participate in raising money, more money for the king than ever before, and suddenly, for the first time in history, kings in England can raise money for many expeditions to go and trash France. Bad news for France, but good news if you're looking at it from the side of this country. And ultimately, France has to develop parliamentary institutions. And so let me stop there. What I'm trying to say is, when we start looking at agency theory on the inside, we start discovering that part of the problem of politics and a part of military power depends on developing an organization of trust, and powerful states depend on political compromises that provide better guarantees to more layers of people. So I'll stop there.
Roger, I really apologize for interrupting.
Oh, no.
I didn't know you knew so much. Great history.
I apologize.
By coincidence, we have the professor of classics sitting next to me.
Oh, very good.
I would have allocated 90 minutes, but it's 1 hour.
No, let's
We
go.
have to go elsewhere at 2 o'clock.
We have to let everyone else go. Let's-
To have an opportunity.
I think we should let students raise questions. However, we should also say that if you happen to be a professor of something who does research in some area that I've been treading on, and especially if you want to tell me I'm wrong, if it's, please feel free to speak also.
Okay,
Good.
so we've got
Okay.
17 minutes.
Would you call? I'll let you.